we're now going to go to Kansas. Mr. Estes, you are up, sir.
Well, great. Thank you, soon to be Chairman Kelly, and thank you, Scott, as well for joining us today and participating in this. I want to focus something on what something President Biden said earlier is that instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America. And we talked about that a lot. I mean, Brad Winstrup talked about it from a medical supply chain, and we talked about it from a process of how do we have good jobs in America. And one of the things that you'd mentioned in your opening, and you know, I've focused on this as well, is you know, part of a main driver of our innovation and investment in the United States is research and development. Yeah. And trying to talk a little bit more in detail about, wouldn't it make more sense to go back to expensing R&D costs and encourage research in the United States, which will then ultimately lead to more manufacturing jobs as well. Can you talk about that a little bit and what some of the effects will be as we get back to that immediate expensing?
Well, clearly we need to reduce the tax costs, well, the entire cost of R&D. So we tend to focus on the tax side of things, but there's regulatory issues there. There's the complexity in our R&D policy, et cetera. And I think that you got to fix all of those things at once. But certainly, the more that we can make the United States attractive to research and development, it also gets to that question of how do you keep the intellectual property here? Well, if they invent it here, they're going to keep it here. And you can only do that through better policy. So allowing companies to expense those R&D, fixing the R&D tax credit, which is very complicated. And oftentimes, what I hear from companies is that the IRS challenges every one of their expenses. And yet here they are trying to provide, you know, or put more R&D here in the United States, but they get challenged by it when they actually file their taxes. So we need to rationalize that to make it easier to allow companies to take advantage of those policies. And ultimately, through broader tax reform, make the U.S. just a more attractive place to do business in.
Yeah, it really is. And the folks that I talked to, I mean, talking about literally going to be hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of the impact this year. Yes. With having to amortize that instead of being able to depreciate that. And particularly in some of our most valuable companies in terms of the products they make, defense companies, large manufacturers, as well as the good quality jobs they provide. And, you know, once we get that fixed, obviously, you touched on as well, is we need to keep corporate rates low as well, because that also is an incentive to do research and development and own intellectual property elsewhere because of our high tax rates. And so I just appreciate you spending the time with us today, talk about these issues. And obviously this is something that we need to do going forward and focus on how do we keep our economy going, because that in addition to addressing some of those costs, particularly the mandatory cost, as Drew mentioned, but focusing on getting the economic growth so that we can have good quality jobs. So, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that.